Okay. Well, I'm pretty excited about today's lesson. It's something that I have to admit, I've been through the Bible a couple of times, and I've taught pretty much everything in the Bible at least one time. But I came across something yesterday as I was preparing this that I went, I think God just put that in there because I don't remember seeing that before. So this is one of those that I'm pretty excited to bring this to you because it's something that I just don't remember ever seeing. So we're going to be continuing our children's Bible stories this morning. And like I said last week, we're going to be talking about Father Abraham. So I kind of made light of it last week by singing the little children's song that, you know, those of us that grew up in church, we probably sang 100 times, you know, Father Abraham had many sons had Father Abraham. I am one of them, and so are you. So let's just praise the Lord. And then they kind of turn it into kind of a hokey pokey kind of thing. So right arm, Father Abraham had many, and then you do left arm, and then right foot and left foot, and yeah, you've never heard that? So yeah, and so there's a lot of children's Christians programming, they do that too. Guarantee you can go onto YouTube and type in Father Abraham, and you'll see about 800 different renditions of that very same song. So we are going to be talking about Father Abraham. So of course, when we talk about Father Abraham, what are we talking about? When we say Father Abraham?
Father of many nations.
Father of many nations. So that's one of the things that he's known for. So as we talk about Abraham, or as we study a little bit more about Abraham, we're going to see that he is much, much, much more than that. So that's what we're going to be doing. Let me see if I can get this working like it's supposed to today. All right. So I didn't even really know what to call this today because I had intended to talk about Abraham and Isaac. But then I said, well, we need to back up a little bit and talk about Abraham and Sarah. I'm like, oh, wait, we need to back up a little bit and talk about Abram and Sarai. I'm like, oh, wait, we need to go back up just a little bit more. There is so much. And so it's going to take us a couple of weeks to get through everything. And then there's still going to be more after that. So I knew that I was in trouble when I was using my source for the children's story, like I always do. I pretty much use the same source because they've been pretty good about putting the children's Bible story together. And they don't really leave anything out, and it leaves me room to expand, which is kind of what we've been doing this whole time. But I knew I was in trouble when the children's Bible story referenced Genesis chapter 12, chapter 17, and chapter 21. So that's 9 whole chapters of Abraham's stuff that the children's story is supposed to be talking about. And it just can't, because there is so much that goes on during those chapters. So here's the children's story. Once there was a man named Abram. One day the Lord came to talk to Abram, and Abram asked, "Who will have all my things when I die?" God promised Abram and his wife, Sarai, that one day they would be parents, even though they were old and they had no children. God wasn't sure that Abram understood. So that night, he took him outside and he said, "Do you see all of the stars that are in the sky?" When Abram looked up, the whole night sky was full of stars. So many, in fact, that he would never be able to count them. Then God said, "That's how many kids and grandkids that you're going to have." Quite a few years later, when Abram was 99 years old, that's older than even your grandparents, the Lord decided to change Abram's name to Abraham, which means father of many. He also changed Sarai's name to Sarah. God told them again that they would be parents and that they would have a boy. This time, Abraham laughed so hard he fell on his face. It was hard to believe that he and Sarah would have a child in their old age. One day, 3 visitors came to Abraham's house. He hurried to meet them. "May I get you something to eat and drink?" Abraham asked. "Please come in and join us and have a rest on the couch." The visitors agreed, so Abraham brought them some fresh bread, milk, and hamburgers. I don't know about that. While the visitors were eating, they asked Abraham, "Where's your wife, Sarah?" Abraham thought this was a little strange, but he replied, "She's in the other room." Then one of the men spoke and he said, "I will come back to see you at this time next year, and Sarah will have a son." Now, Sarah was listening behind the living room door. She started to laugh, but she covered her mouth and laughed to herself because she didn't want to be heard. Then she said to herself, "How can I have a child? I'm almost 100 years old." Later, when the visitors had left, Abraham and Sarah realized that the man who had told them this was indeed God. A year later, Sarah did have a son, and she and Abraham named him Isaac, which means he laughs. They were very excited, and they remembered to thank God for Isaac. Yeah, we missed a lot. There's a lot that's missing in that story. Can anybody think of anything?
Ishmael.
Yeah, Ishmael. We got to talk about Ishmael. So that's why when I sent the note out yesterday to everybody, I said we were going to be talking about Abraham and Ishmael and Isaac. So we're going to camp out on Ishmael because it's not, but wait, there's more. It's, but wait, there's a lot more. So I had to bring in the ShamWow guy. Do y'all remember the ShamWow guy? Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff that gets missed in here. So we need to go back to the top. We're going to be stuck in Abraham for probably several weeks because there are a lot of children's stories that are wrapped up just in Abraham. So we're going to hit those before jumping back to the New Testament. So here we go. When we first get introduced to Abram in Genesis chapter 11, this is right after the Tower of Babel. Whoa, where'd my poster go? I was going to use it today.
This place was set up for a thing yesterday for a shower or something.
Oh, man. All right. All right. So to kind of talk about where we are in the whole line of things here, we've got Adam, who is the first man, and his name actually means man. Okay, that's what the name Adam means, man. So we got Adam, and then we got Adam and Eve's son, Shem, who is his third son, right? We had Cain and Abel, and then there was that whole incident there. And then we got the third son, Shem. Shem had a son named Arphaxad, and then Salah, Eber, Peleg, Reu, Serug, Nahor, Terah, and then Abram. So you can see that this is 11 generations. So Abram is 11 generations from Adam, but it represents 2,000 years of time. So go back in your memory banks when we were talking about creation versus evolution, and we talked about how long people lived before the flood. Okay, so by the time we get to about Peleg, everybody's living to be 400, 500, 600. Even Methuselah lived to be 969 years old. And this is before the flood. So everybody lived longer before the flood. After the flood, though, everything changes. The whole biome changes. All the atmospheric pressures change, the amount of humidity, the amount of oxygen, everything changes. And at that point, people don't live as long anymore because now we got all sorts of things that are just detrimental to the human body. Solar radiation, cosmic radiation, even radioactive decay that's in the earth itself. All of that is acting against the human body every second of every single day. So we don't live as long as we did before the flood. So then we've got Reu, Serug, Nahor, Terah, who is Abram's father, and then Abram. So where we pick up in chapter 12, it's only 422 years and 10 days from the Great Flood. So they really kept track of years and days really well after the flood. I don't know why things changed so much after the flood as far as timekeeping, but everything was really established at that point. So history, prehistory, even world history starts lining up with the events of Genesis after the flood. It's pretty cool because there is no controversy about political events that happen in Scripture because there's other sources that confirm those political events that happened and when they happened. So that's all cool stuff. So we need to talk a little bit about the family tree. So we're talking about Terah, who is Abram's father. So really, we see in Scripture that there are three sons of Terah. There's Haran, Nahor, and Abram. We know that Haran had two children because those are specifically mentioned. There's Milcah and Lot. Now we've heard of Lot before, right? Lot's wife? A lot. So we're going to be talking about Lot in about 3 or 4 weeks. One of the weird things, though, is that Haran's daughter, Milcah, married Terah's second son, Nahor. So we got a little bit of planning going on here. But this is the way. There was a lot of planning going on. If you remember when we were talking about Samson, remember Samson's mom and dad said, why don't you marry someone that's in our clan? Because that's how we do things. But Samson wanted to marry outside the clan. So it was normal back then to marry inside the clan. Then we've got Abram. Abram had two sons, Ishmael and Isaac. And so we're going to concentrate on them. But there's some important players in this family tree, and that's why I needed to mention it. So Haran was the brother of Abram, but we'll see in a bit that Haran is also the name of a place, okay? Because usually these place names are named after people's names. It wasn't the same Haran, but apparently Haran was a common enough name that there just happened to be a place named Haran and a person named Haran. And we saw that before with Gideon. There is a person named Gideon, but there was also a place called Gideon. So it gets confusing. So I was just going to bring that up right now. Haran dies pretty young. But this is the beginnings of the family group that we meet in Genesis chapter 11, verse 31. So we have a trek that starts back here in the end of chapter 11, beginning of chapter 12. And it says that Abram was born in a land called Ur, U-R. Now there's another Ur, so they call this Ur of the Chaldeans, which means that it is in the Babylonian kingdom, because the Chaldeans we get introduced to back in or later on in the book of Daniel. Daniel was a teacher of the Chaldeans. That was a Persian area, Babylon. It's northwest of the Persian Gulf, near modern-day Basra, Iraq. And we, of course, hear that in the news. Abram was from a region of idol worshipers. They did not know who God was. They worshiped all sorts of different gods. And they had all sorts of different family temples that there were different stone and wood idols that they would pray to for different things. So he was from a region of idol worshipers. He was from a family of idol worshipers. And then what happens is God all of a sudden appears to Abraham and says, go to this land that I will show you. And what does Abram do? He says, okay. And he picks up and he goes. And this is one of the reasons that Abram is listed in Hebrews chapter 11, which is called the Hall of Faith. There is different Old Testament characters that are listed in Hebrews 11 because of their extraordinary faith. And Abram is on this list because he didn't know who God was. He didn't worship this Jehovah God. He worshiped idols. But God appears to him and says, go to this place that I'll show you. So just pick up, start moving, and I'll tell you when you get there. And so he does. In Genesis chapter 11, verses 31 and 32, it tells us that he left Ur and he traveled to Haran, the place Haran, even though he had a brother named Haran. Okay, goes to the place Haran. And if you look at the map, Ur is down here at the bottom, and they go up the river, and then they go north up here to Haran. That's 577 miles. They don't have a plane. They don't have a train. They don't have an automobile. This is on foot. Okay? Maybe on donkeys and horses. They are in Persia. There were horses. But still, that's a long way, even by a horse. Okay? Back in the olden days, like 1800s, how far was a half day's travel by horse?
Half a county.
Okay, about half a county. That's why when you leave Gonzales, there's little towns every 7 miles. Because that's about how far you can go before the horses need to be watered again. So in any direction you go, there were little settlements that you can go for a water stop and then keep on going. So you could get from Gonzales to Seguin in about a day. Okay. So that would tell you just how long it would take to go 577 miles, even by horse. Okay. Pretty crazy. When we get to Genesis chapter 12, verse 1, it says, now the Lord had said to Abram. That struck me as weird when I read that as I was preparing this, because it did not say, now the Lord said to Abram. It said, the Lord had said to Abram. What does that imply? That's past tense. The Lord told this to Abram in the past. And who did God tell Abram to take? Sometime before this time, God told Abram to leave his land, leave his father, leave his other family, and go with just himself and Sarai to the land that God will show him. But in Genesis chapter 11, it tells us that Terah, his father, took Abram and Sarai and Lot and their servants and their flocks and traveled to Haran. God intended Abram to go to Canaan. So why do you think they stopped in Haran? This is what shook me yesterday when I read this, and I'm like, oh. What was the instruction to Abram? Who was he to go with? Just him and his wife. But who did he go with instead? Pretty much the whole family. Went with the clan. And who was doing the leading? Abram's father, not Abram. Abram didn't follow directions. And because he didn't follow directions, he did not end up in the land that God was going to show him. Instead, they ended up in Haran. Genesis 11:32, though, tells us that Terah, Abram's father, dies in Haran. And he dies when Abram was 75. So Genesis 12:1 reminds Abram of the call that he was given 5 years earlier. Take you and your wife and go to the land that I'm going to show you. So now we've got a 5-year delay because he didn't follow what God had said. Abram didn't obey fully. He didn't take charge. His father led the way. No wonder they didn't go to the place that God was going to show Abram, because who did Abram's father worship? Idols. Didn't follow God, didn't recognize God. So they didn't go where they were supposed to go. And then what happens is they go to Haran, and Abram leaves now 5 years later because his father is now dead. But now he leaves with his wife Sarai and his nephew Lot. He's still not following directions. So after leaving Haran, he's still not being completely obedient. But at least now he's heading in the right direction. He starts heading south, okay? And then after reaching Canaan, he keeps on going. He doesn't stop. But this is the place that we know, because we're looking back. This is the place that we know he's supposed to be settling. So they walk through Canaan, and they just keep on walking south. And they walk south into the Negev desert. So Haran's up there. They keep on walking, go through what's modern day Israel, which is where he was supposed to stop. And he keeps on going down into the Negev desert and finds himself all the way down in Egypt. On their way at Shechem, that's where God tells Abram, I'm going to give this land to your descendants. Keep going. He didn't tell him to stop there. And he didn't give the land to him there. Just as they're walking through, I'm going to give this land to your descendants. So why did they not stop? How come they didn't stop here where we know they're going to end up stopping eventually? Who is still with Abram and Sarah? Lot. And was he supposed to be there? Nope. God did not want him there. And so God did not tell Abram, here's the spot. So they just kept on going. All right, so Abram then ends up in Egypt. And we're going to talk about that next week. In Genesis 13, verses 14 through 17, after Abram separates from Lot, finally, God tells Abram, go and walk through the length and the breadth of this land, for I am giving it to you. So this is years after the original call. This is years after God told Abram, pick up you and your wife and go to this place that I'm going to show you. Why did it take so long? He didn't follow what God told him to do. He kind of did, but not all the way. So you can see then that he goes from Ur to Haran, goes through the land all the way to Egypt, and he spends quite a bit of time in Egypt. Then after some time, he and Sarah and Lot then head back north. And that's when God starts to put some strife between his hands and Lot's hands. So he has his own servants and shepherds, and Lot has his own servants and shepherds, and they start quarreling. And finally, Abram tells Lot, listen, this isn't working out. We're going to have to separate. We're too big. So you can pick where you want to go, and then I'm going to go in the other direction. And at that point, they separate. And now finally, it's just Abram and Sarai. And at that point is when God says, as they're walking, okay, stop. I want you to look in this direction, look in this direction, look in this direction. This is all yours. Go ahead and walk it so that you can get the lay of the land, because this is the place. And that's Canaan, where modern day Israel is today. Okay? Any questions so far? That's all the backstory. All right. So in Genesis 14, we've got this war in the valley. And during that chapter, you get to meet General Abraham. Did you know that Abram was a general of the army? Yeah, it's a big deal. During this battle that he wins, he meets Melchizedek. What's the importance of Melchizedek? What's Jesse been preaching about for the past 3 weeks? Melchizedek. He mentions him again and again and again. This is where we meet Melchizedek. Then in chapter 15, we've got the Abrahamic Covenant that gets established. Really cool story here, but we're not talking about that today. Then we get to the promise. This is the only piece of 15 that we're going to talk about. In Genesis 15:1, God tells Abram, don't be afraid. I am your shield, your very great reward. So this is how God describes himself to Abram. And then Abram asks God, what reward can you give since I'm childless and you've given me no heir? Now, it seems that Abram's question is rude, okay? But he understood the importance of the reward that God is giving. And he understands that this reward is going to outlast him. And so what he's saying is he's asking God, are you sure you want to give me this reward? Because it's going to end up in the hands of a servant, someone that's not even related to me. So God, are you sure you want to give me this reward? You hear the difference now? It's not, what are you going to give me? Or what am I going to get? That's not what he's asking at all. He's saying, are you sure you want this in the hands of someone that I may not even know? Because I don't have any heirs to give it to. At this point in verse 5 is when God takes him outside and he says, look up in the sky, count the stars, if indeed you can count them. And then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. Now it makes sense, because he's saying, are you sure you want to give me a reward? It's going to end up in some stranger's hands. And God says, no, I know what I'm doing. I'm going to give you the reward because this is how many people you're going to pass it down to. And what's that reward that he's talking about? I just gave myself goosebumps. Salvation. That's what he's talking about, the reward of salvation. And he's giving it to as many people as the number of stars that are in the heavens. And then verse 6 says, Abram believed the Lord, and God credited it to him as righteousness. Notice that all Abram did was believe. God said it, and Abram says, okay. He just believed it. And then God declared Abram righteous. What does that word righteous mean? This is a major definition, so write this down, okay? Righteous means a right standing with God. Righteous means a right standing with God. So that means God's looking at him and is saying, you're all right, okay? But Abram's just a man, which means he is a sinner, just like the rest of us. So why did God look at him and said, you're all right? Just because he believed. He didn't have to do anything. He just had to take God at God's word. And that's really all God asks us to do. Take him at his word. So he believed him before, but just kind of sort of did what he was asked to do. So Abram is a man of faith. But as we read about Abram from the first time he's introduced in chapter 11 to the time that Abraham dies, we see a man of growing faith. Okay, so it's not like he was born and he had all of this awesome faith that ended him in Hebrews 11 in the Hall of Faith. He grew with God, and his faith grew as he experienced more and more of God. And that's exactly what God wants us to do. Grow in faith as we grow closer to him. All right, cool stuff. By the time we get to chapter 16, Abram fills Sarai in on this promise that God made. Sarai, God said that we're going to have as many children as the stars are in the sky, and as many children as the sand on the seashore. So, chapter 16 starts. It says, now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. But she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, the Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her. Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave, Hagar, gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar, and she conceived. I could preach a whole Sunday just on this, okay? First of all, Sarai's name. Now, Abram, the name Abram means father, okay? The name itself means father. Sarai means contentious. So just to give you a little clue, all right, her personality, she lives up to it here. Basically, she says, so God's going to give you as many children as the stars in the sky. Well, obviously, God's mad at me. She says that, right? She says, the Lord has kept me from having children. So evidently, God's mad at me. So you're not going to have any children through me. So you're going to have some children some other way. So let me help. So she steps in and gives Hagar to Abram. Now, this is not odd for them. Back then, any slaves that you owned, any servants that you had, if they acquired any belongings, who do those belongings belong to? The owner. Okay, so if Sarai had a slave, anything that that slave had, including children, belongs to her. And that's how it was back then. Okay, we kind of have that smudge in our history as well with black slaves. If any black slaves had children, those children also became the slaves, the property of the owner. Okay, so it's that same kind of deal. So this Egyptian slave then had a child, and it was legal that that child could then be taken by Abram and Sarai to be their very own. And Hagar would have no hold or call or anything over that child, because that child belonged to Abram and Sarai. Okay, so the fact that Hagar conceived would be a real slap to Sarai, because Sarai already said, the Lord has closed my womb and I can't have any children. So basically, the Lord has cursed me. So now Hagar has had a child, proving that it had nothing to do with Abram. So it must really have had something to do with Sarai, according to her. So now we've got a bigger problem. When Hagar knew that she was pregnant, she began to despise Sarai. Sarai said to Abram, you are responsible for the wrong I'm suffering. Oh, wait a minute. Whose idea was this? It was her idea. So you're responsible for the wrong I'm suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows that she's pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me. Basically saying, you and I, we got problems. Okay? And then Abram says, your slave is in your hands. Do with her whatever you think best. It's your slave. Do whatever you want. It was your idea. Do whatever you want. Then Sarai mistreated Hagar. So Hagar fled from her. So Hagar, now that her womb was opened and she becomes pregnant, she begins to act out on her blessing. So basically, she understands what Sarai thinks. I can't have any children because God's mad at me, right? God's not letting me get pregnant. So I can imagine Hagar, washing dishes, and she's like, yeah, too bad God's so mad at you. Yeah, I'm going to have this baby. Yeah. She's rubbing it in. That's what's going on. And this is why Sarai gets so mad. And Abram just says, do with her what you want. And Sarai mistreats her to the point that Hagar runs for her life. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that's beside the road to Shur. And he said to Hagar, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from? And where are you going? I'm running away from my mistress, Sarai, she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, go back to your mistress and submit to her. The angel added, I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. Got another blessing going on here. What's some other things that jump out at you, though? Who is talking to Hagar? The angel of the Lord. Who is this? Jesus. Jesus shows up to Hagar in the wilderness and tells her, listen, you need to go back to Sarai. You owe her. because she's responsible for you. You need to go back to her. And don't worry, I am going to increase your descendants so much that they're going to be too numerous to count. Now, this is an important blessing because your worth is based not only on the stuff that you have, but on the number of children you have. And so basically, he's telling her, you're not going to be a slave forever. You're going to be very important because you're going to have a lot of children. The angel of the Lord also said to her, you are now pregnant and you will give birth to a son. You will name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him. And he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. So the name Ishmael itself means God hears. Anytime you see an Old Testament name that ends with EL, that means God, our God, okay? So that's why when we have Gabriel, the archangel, Mishael, Michael, another angel, those are all things about God, the messenger of God, the warrior of God, the brightness of God, all of those El names that you see. So this Ishmael means God hears. Something else that's really cool, and I need to bring this up right now, is that very last line. It says that he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. Hebrew is a very complex language. And when it got translated into English, there's a lot of subtlety in the Hebrew words that got simplified when it came to English. It's kind of like Greek. There's a lot of different words in Greek for love, but in English, it's just love. So we say, I love my car. I love eating chicken fried steak. I love my wife. I love my mother. But all of those loves are different kinds of love. We understand that by context. In Greek and in Hebrew, there's actually different words that are used for love, all those different kinds of love. Well, this word toward is the same way. There's different towards. There's towards for near right here. There's towards for near but over there. And there's towards to the east, towards to the west, towards to the north, towards to the south. In this case, it means toward to the east. So he is going to live to the east of all of his relatives. That's going to be important. Tuck that away. You're going to need that. Verse 13, she gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the one who sees me. That's what she named God right there. For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. Now remember, 86 back then would be kind of like 28 now. He had a lot of years left, okay? So he wasn't that old. Verse 19, then God said, yes. This is actually chapter 17. Then God said, yes, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. And as for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will surely bless him. I will make him fruitful and will greatly increase his numbers, for he will be the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you by this time next year. When he had finished speaking with Abraham, God went up from him. So in chapter 17, a lot happens. God renames Abram. Remember, Abram means father. So now he renames him and calls him Abraham, which means father of many nations. he gets a new name, Father of Many Nations. Wow, talk about a promotion. God also gives instructions to Abraham that Abraham's descendants needs to be different from all of the other people of the world. This is where circumcision comes in. It's to be a constant reminder that I am different than the other people because I am God's. Okay? Something that's that close to you will be a constant reminder that I am God's. It's about a promise that's made to God. He also renames Sarai. What did I say Sarai meant before? Contentious. And now she gets a new name, Sarah, which means woman of honor. So no longer contentious. She is a woman of honor. God reminds Abraham that there is still a child of promise. You've had a son, but this isn't the son that I told you to wait for. So basically, yeah, you followed my directions, but again, you didn't follow them all the way. This time, Abram laughs out loud, but he doubts to himself. God hears the doubt, and he again states the promise with more detail. You're going to have a son, and you're going to name him Isaac. And Isaac is a name that means laughter. So because Sarah laughed behind the living room door, and now Abraham laughed when God said you're going to have a son, fine, you're going to name your child Isaac, so that you can be reminded that you laughed at me when I told you he was going to come along. God then promises a blessing to Sarah and a blessing to Isaac, and Abraham asks for a blessing for Ishmael as well. And God says, okay, I'll turn him into a great nation also. Uh-oh, you better be careful what you're praying for, because there's more to the story. Ishmael's 13 years old now when Isaac gets born. Hagar and Ishmael gets banished again, this time again by Sarah. Isaac is born. She's worried that Ishmael is going to get more stuff than Isaac did. This is her child now. Hagar, that's your child. This is mine. Abraham's trying to resist this time. Before he said, she's your servant. Do with her what you want. But now he's like, no. You can't send them out into the wilderness. You've raised Ishmael as your own. He's yours. No, she wouldn't hear of it. And at the same time, God then tells Abraham, it's okay. Let them go, because I have special plans for them. I'm going to take care of them. So Hagar and Ishmael head out into the wilderness. They almost die of thirst, but the angel of the Lord came and rescued them. So again, Jesus shows up again, takes care of Ishmael, takes care of Hagar. They then go and settle in Paran, which is in northeastern Sinai Peninsula. Okay, now I've thrown a lot of places out to you. Okay, so we talked about Babylon, Persia. We talked about Iraq. Now we're in the Sinai Peninsula. What do all of these things have in common today? Strife. By whom? Who all lives there? Muslims. They're all Arabs. This is all Arab country. Okay. So Ishmael does become the father of 12 sons. And here they all are. And they are referred to as the 12 princes. They're also called the 12 Sheiks. What do we know about Sheiks? They're basically Arab tribal kings. Okay? We see these Ishmaelites show up again, descendants of Ishmael, Joseph was sold to a band of Ishmaelites by his brothers. Gideon defeated the Ishmaelite armies and melted down their golden earrings to make the great golden ephod that we talked about. So Ishmael is a major player in world history. As a matter of fact, Islam considers Ishmael an appointed prophet of Allah. Islam also considers Ishmael as the son that Abraham was going to sacrifice, not Isaac. And Isaac was rescued by God by sending a lamb, right? By sending that ram that became the sacrifice. If you remember that story, right? But according to Islam, Ishmael was the son that Abraham was going to sacrifice and rescued by the sharp knife that Abraham was wielding, not able to cut Ishmael's throat. That was the rescue, according to Islam. They consider him to be the ancestor of Muhammad. They consider him to be the ancestor of the Arab people in general. He's listed in the Quran as being righteous, good, and chosen. And he's listed up there along with Elisha and Jonah and Lot. We got a problem if you're considering Jonah and Lot as being righteous and good and chosen, because they got their own stories. Quran's a little messed up here.
And Muhammad is
way later. Yeah, Muhammad is way later. Muhammad is considered the last great prophet. So that's the one that they still worship the most as being the greatest of the prophets. Ishmael and his mom Hagar settled in what's modern day Mecca. And it's said that he laid the foundations for the Kaaba. You've seen that on the news. So every year in Ramadan, when the Muslims do their pilgrimage to Mecca, there's millions and millions of people every year that they head to Mecca to go pray around this big white cube. And they're all marching in circles around this white cube. You can find the videos. It happens every year. That big white cube is called the Kaaba. And so it's said that Ishmael is the one that set the foundations for that big white cube that they're marching around. And this is the holiest place for Muslims. It's kind of like the Jews' Temple Mount being the holiest place, the Holy of Holies. This is the Muslims' Holy of Holies. Okay? All of that from Ishmael. Ishmael and Isaac didn't have anything against each other. But Ishmael's mom, Hagar, Isaac's mom, Sarah, they had problems. And they set the temperature for a tribal feud that started just 400 or so years after the flood. And it sets up battle between the Israelites, the descendants of Abraham, and the Ishmaelites that we now call Arabs. So the Jews and the Arabs are still at war today. And it's all because of Sarah giving Hagar to Abram instead of waiting for God's promise. Okay, so I don't want to blame everything on Sarah because Abram was a mess. So I told you we're going to talk about Abram in Egypt. Man, that is an awesome story, and oh, what a soap opera. And so that's going to be next week when we talk about Abram in Egypt. Any questions about everything that I talked about today? It's a lot of stuff.
I'm just going back to verse 12, the Hagar on the wall. And he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. But he was told there
Right. The prophecy was made then that Ishmael is going to live in hostility against Isaac. And it's all laid out because of Sarah and Hagar. And then it says that his hand will be against everyone. The Arabs don't ally themselves with anyone. The Arabs don't ally themselves with the Russians. They don't ally themselves with anybody. Militarily, it's just them. Now, they'll take a good financial deal wherever they can get one. But they don't need any help fighting. Okay? And it says everyone's hand will be against them. There's nobody that likes the Arabs. In the world, everybody's mad at the Arabs for one reason or another. It was prophesied back then. And he will live in hostility toward his brothers. Remember I said where he was going to be? Toward to the east. Where are the Arab nations in relation to Israel? To the east. So the prophecy was made by Jesus back then, even before Isaac was born. It was all laid out. And we're still living with those consequences today. Okay, cool stuff. Anything else? All right, cool. That's all I've got for you today.